morning, friends. Tessa Timberlake here with Soulful Conversations, exploring our inner light. Today's episode is called Aleph, the Silent Thread, Connecting God, Language, and Unity. What if the very letters of a language could reveal the essence of existence? In this episode, we dive into the hidden depth of the Hebrew language with my friend Aaron Fast, exploring how its letters are more than symbols. They're stories, they're mysteries, and pathways to understanding God. We unravel the significance of Aleph, the silent breath of unity, and its connection to the divine presence in every moment. Aaron shares his journey of learning Hebrew, discovering its profound spiritual significance, and how it reshapes our understanding of faith, language, and life itself. Whether you're new to Hebrew or simply seeking a fresh perspective on its spirituality, this conversation will challenge and inspire you. Enjoy. Hi, friends. Tessa Timberlake here with Soulful Conversations, exploring our inner light. Today, I am with my friend, Aaron Fast. So, Aaron is here to talk with us about the Hebrew language. How freaking amazing and cool is that? I met him over the summer. We go to the same gym. And so he actually knew my son before he knew me. And he came up and asked me, he said, Are you Jay's mom? And I was like, I am. And I thought that was really cool because I always think that Jay looks like me. And my son doesn't, my son and my husband really don't like that because they think that they look like each other, and they do, but he really does look like me. So anyway, so Aaron and I right away clicked because we started talking about religion and spiritualism and all of these things. And right away I was fascinated because I've been listening to a couple pastors through podcasts that teach Hebrew for Christians, right? And go through Bible passages, and it has really rocked my world. Welcome to the podcast, Aaron. He's going to teach us all about Hebrew culture and language and one specific word. So he's going to keep it light, he says. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's fun to be here.
Yeah. So Aaron, what do you do and why do you do it?
Well, aside from my sort of main gig, which I'm a music teacher, but as an adult, I began learning Hebrew as part of an exploration of my own heritage, and I was living in Jerusalem for a while, and I was sort of a tireless spiritual seeker at that time. So I was digging really deep into the culture around me and sort of mining meaning out of it. And I knew that something was going on in this culture. That's the root of so much of the Western spiritual traditions. But it was very, very hard for me as sort of an outsider, although it's part of my heritage. I wasn't really steeped in it. It was very hard for me to access what was going on there. And I realized pretty quickly that the Hebrew spiritual tradition is really different from the other traditions I'd been studying, Zen and the stuff I'd learned in yoga, whatever else here or there. There was a big difference in that Zen is sort of giving over a set of ideas or teachings that can, lead to the desired effect that they have. But the teachings essentially in the concept, that they're giving a concept over to you. So if I say to you in English, I say to you in Spanish, I say to you in French, it's fundamentally basically the same. It's a concept that's being conveyed. And there's a lot to dig into in that language as well, obviously. But I realized very early on that there was nothing to learn in Hebrew scripture on a deeper level without knowing the language. I realized very quickly that the traditional belief is that the meaning of the Torah or the Hebrew Bible or the whole canon of Hebrew scripture, the meaning is encoded in the language itself and in the letters themselves, even down to the extent of the shapes of the letters, the sounds of the individual letters. It wasn't just making an arbitrary sound to point your mind to a particular object. Like in English, I say dog. There's a dog. And the dog is essentially an arbitrary sound that we've collectively decided refers to a dog. So I can trigger the image of a dog in your mind by saying dog. That's sort of a conceptual way of using language. I'm giving over you a concept by triggering it with the sound. But I learned really early on that all of the Hebrew studies that I were trying to do were pulling apart the language in this microscopic way. They were saying, well, why does this word include this letter, which is, let's say, like an optional letter? There are some alternate spellings of Hebrew words that have a silent letter or don't have a silent letter in them. It could be spelled either way. And they'd be saying, well, why does this verse here include this word with the silent letter? And that verse over there, spell it without the silent letter. And I'd be like, what the hell is that? Like, what do you even mean? What kind of question is that? Who goes and reads Moby Dick and goes like, oh, interesting, on page 39, like the apostrophe it was just so meticulously investigated. So it said, well, what the hell does it mean if the letter's there or it's not there? So then I started going, well, I guess I got to know what the letter is. So at the age, in my mid to late 20s, I was starting to learn, the alphabet like I was a 5-year-old, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, So there's actually a really great parallel to that. A story that encouraged me. There's one of the great rabbis of the of I guess it's the he's in the Mishnaic era. I guess he was alive. He was actually killed by the Romans around the time of the destruction of the temple. So that was in the 1st century, what we'd call CE or AD. So and that Rebbe is Rebbe Akiva. And Rebbe Akiva started learning when he was 40 years old. So we have all these interesting stories about him like squeezing into the little desk and sitting in the back of the room with the kindergarten class because he didn't know A, B, C, D, E, F, G, So what I came to understand was that I was learning A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but I was coming at it with an adult's brain who had this meditation background and had this really profound set of spiritual experiences that I'd acquired through yoga practice and various things that I had. So the letter A to me was like earth shattering because I was able in my older age to perceive the deeper implications of this letter. And I want to stop there because that sounds really cuckoo. Like, oh, the deeper implications of the letter A. It's
It
like,
does
what?
not.
Okay, well,
He's
not to
going to
you.
explain.
Right, not to you. But well, so that's part of the thing now, right? Is that calling a Hebrew letter a letter is already like a mistranslation in a way, right? In Hebrew we call them an os. An os or an ot, depending on your accent. I have a dorky accent. An ois, an os is means like a sign. It's a symbol is a good way to translate. It's a symbol that represents something. So if you think between East and West, you have two different approaches to language. In the East, you have what we call ideogrammatic. You have an ideogram. So Chinese characters evolved from essentially simplified drawings of things. And then they started to become more abstract and combined and whatever, but their roots are sort of in a simplified visual representation of something. And then you have, the Romance languages and stuff like that, which are in Latin rooted languages, which are in alphabetic languages, which are what we're talking earlier, dog. And then I need 3 sounds to get across the word that I made with my mouth that refers. So in between these two things, and geographically in between these two regions of where these, two approaches took root, you have, ancient Israel and the Hebrew people sitting there sort of right at the center of the world, at the confluence of East and West. So in their language, this geographic sort of location is represented that they have a language that's both ideogrammatic, that the letters have implicit meaning based on their shape, and that they express something in themselves. And then you have also a combination of those to make an alphabet so that you can put them together and combine them around like their DNA to build words. And in fact, the famous Jewish teaching is that, God spoke the world into existence, and he spoke the world into existence using this particular language. It is collection of 22 Hebrew letters or consonants or symbols. Um, and that everything that exists is a combination of those 22 letters. And that's kind of very strange. Like, well, what does that mean? Well, it sounds kind of dumb or something you have to accept on faith until you realize what it's really saying, that these are sort of 22 essential energies or spiritual concepts or fundamental um, fundamental spiritual realities, I guess we could say, or so it's like the philosophical DNA of the things that appear in this world, the Platonic form, if you will, right? So we have these 22 symbols that represent sort of a deep idea, and we can combine them in all these different ways to make words and draw out meaning from that. So the meaning that you draw from that is going to be a lot deeper when you're reading a string of combined symbols, each of which has sort of a deeper meaning. The meaning of a word is going to be much deeper than dog, cat, book, bus, because it's not just a sound in a word. It's supposed to express something in the language itself that is more profound than the object that it's referring to. So,
It's so good. It's
yeah,
so good. Woo,
yeah.
Lordy. Okay, so what first drew you to the Hebrew language?
Well,
And what
necessity.
sparked your passion for it? I mean, I know you kind of already talked about this, but
Yeah.
what keeps you coming back to it?
Oh,
You're very passionate about it. You're very expressive about it, and I am drawn to that.
thank you.
I've spoke to Aaron 3 times, a total of 3 times, and I feel like I've known him all of my days. I told him I loved him last week, and I was like, "Oh, that was probably inappropriate." And he was like, "I love you too, sister." Because I mean, it's like the passion for God and the language that in which God spoke, through us and throughout the world. eh, He's obsessed with. And yeah, so tell us
Well,
why you're obsessed with it.
yeah, I'm obsessed with one thing, and I've been obsessed with one thing for about 21 years now. And that one thing is the experiential reality that is at the heart of all religious practice, right? There's something that we're supposed to be aiming towards with all of this going to church and sitting and meditating, and even the yogis in India holding their arms up for their whole lives. It's like, what are they going for? There's an experience of something at the core of all human yearning, which is peace, and it transcends sort of the material up and downs and something outside of this world of pleasure, pain, and whatever. So that's all I'm interested in. I realized when I was living in Jerusalem that there's an ancient tradition that attempts to guide people towards this experience and train people up to have an experiential experience, to have an experience of the divine, so that God is not an idea, um, but that
He's an experience.
there's an encounter with an isness that can then be internalized and understood, that when a prophet says God spoke to me and said, you have some inkling of what the heck does that mean, because that's the most confusing statement in the world. God spoke to Moses. What does that mean? So I wanted to figure out what that meant, and I you know, I'm not capable of it. Like I don't understand what it meant, but I wanted to just get at the experience. Like, why did this entire insane religion evolve? Like, what was it? What's at the heart of it? What was it going for? So my interest was always in just the experience of God. And then this for me was a path towards the experience of God. I'd done yoga, gone through the body, I'd done the Zen thing, tried to like get beyond the thinking into that sort of like oceanic space. And I've had those spiritual experiences and those experiences of light and inner light and all that stuff. And then it's like, well, what the hell are the Jews talking about? what's, what's all these letters cluttering up my oceanic space, man? we gotta. So I started investigating what all those letters were that were cluttering up the oceanic space and seeing if they were related to it, if they were a distraction from it. So my passion was just an extension of my desire to get enlightened, quote unquote, get enlightened or die trying. That's been my motto, since I started. And I haven't died or gotten enlightened yet, so yes.
It's a difficult path. I am in the middle of yoga teacher training, and as I am reminded of the beauty in the beginnings of yoga and the history and the philosophy,
Mhm.
I am just washed. I'm baptized again in it. And
It
it's
was
just
so real,
so
so
beautiful.
deep. The
And
origins
now
of
in the
yoga.
yes, the
Oh,
beginning, I was so steeped in Christianity that I was afraid. And I was
sure.
literally, the metaphor is like, I'm not I'm not really gonna do this. I'm really
Right,
not gonna listen to this because this
right.
is not of God. This is of
Sure,
Hinduism.
sure,
And
sure.
so therefore I cannot, right? And then little ignorant me, right, had to read some of these books, the Bhagavad Gita and, other
Oh,
books. And so
I have two translations of the Gita that I travel with. I
I,
love the Gita.
yes, and that, well,
Whew.
and I really want to watch the Malabhadra.
Oh, the
There's
Mahabharata. Yeah, yeah,
20, yes, there's like
yeah, yeah,
26 videos that you can watch. One of my teachers just read it. I mean,
yeah.
watched it.
It's funny. It's like
Anyway,
that old Bollywood style kind of stuff with like really bad graphics. Is it? There's a
right. It's just ethics.
yeah.
I mean,
No,
it's truly just ethics, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah. But
just
I think
a
I know the
way of
particular one
life.
we're talking about. I've read like an abridged version of the larger the Mahabharata, right? I think it's like which
Right.
is what the Gita is extracted from, right?
Right.
And it's like
Right.
it's a lot, dude. It's like taking in an entire culture. It's so much. It's
Right. Right.
yeah,
But it's like you really you learn that we're so small. We think that, oh, we can only stay right here because this is the right way.
right.
Are you serious? God is that small?
Right,
God's
exactly.
not
Well,
that
so that
small,
that
right?
transitions right, exactly, right, and that really is beautiful and transitions really into like the meat of what I think we're going to talk about today, which is like fundamentally there is one thing. There is the fact of existence, right? And every human being has in them this exact same drive. Before you have words on it, you don't have any Christian words in a baby who has this yearning, just like me and you, to somehow experience union with the place it came from. It's more fundamental than language. It is the absolute essence of a human being. Every single human being, even God forbid, even Adolf Hitler, who covered it up and made it his life mission to deny it and try to get away from it and pretend it didn't exist, somewhere deep down in him, every physiological human being only wants God. Only wants God. And they don't have to call it God, and they can say they don't believe in God, and they could find it and still say there's no such thing as God because words get confusing and they mean different things to everybody. But there's only one thing that comes before anything. That's the first principle, and that is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. That's where they start from in the Hebrew language. Is the first letter is one. First of all, it's the number one also. We'll get to that. But there is something that's more important than any sound that I could make or any concept I could give you or any word I could say to you. And this of necessity pre-exists every other thing I could possibly say. It's the canvas that everything is painted on. And it's also the gold that all the jewelry is formed out of. It's just the pure essence of gold itself. And that is what existed before the world and what it will exist after the world, and whose existence is unaffected by the world, but whose existence can affect the world,
Oh,
right? That's the thing. There's
friends,
a
I wish you could see how expressive and passionate he is. He is so passionate. He's
I'm
on
enjoying myself.
fire.
I'm enjoying myself. But the best way to talk about it, because I do want to get back to Hebrew language because it encodes this sort of understanding in a very profound way. And the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet is so deep. It goes so much deeper than anything I just pointed at. But here's the simplest way to get at it. There's a classic question that every school child in the Hebrew school learns when they're 4 or 5 years old or 6 years old, depending on how good your Rebbe is. And they ask, okay, here's the Torah, and God wrote this book, and why did it start with the letter B? The Torah starts
Mm.
with the word Bereshis, in the beginning. Bereshis. Be is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the first being Aleph. By the way, Aleph base comes from the same root as alpha beta. So the Greek alphabet is in Hebrew we call it the Aleph base. And they both come from the Phoenician alphabet. They have a common ancestor in an old Phoenician alphabet. So there's Aleph base, there's alpha beta, and there's A, B. The Torah starts with the letter B, which in Hebrew is base or bait or however you want to say it. So um, this is a question all school kids get asked, and there are literally 250 answers to this question that are written down somewhere or another, and they're cute and they're fun, and some of them are for kids or some of them are for Kabbalistic thinkers. They run the whole gamut. But the fundamental understanding is that Aleph can't be articulated. The first letter can't be spoken. It precedes speaking. Before there's speech, there has to be the potential for speech. Before there's a vibration in the ether, there has to be an ether. And if the ether permutes itself and changes itself and transforms itself to make sound, then we can talk about those sounds. But before those sounds existed was the carrier of all sound. And the carrier of all sound is one unified, absolute, fundamental existence. And that is the letter Aleph. And that's why the Torah does not start with the letter Aleph, because it presupposes the letter Aleph. It assumes that you know about Aleph already if you're opening the Torah.
Oh, that is so good. Okay, so before we keep going, when he and I were talking about this over the phone, um, it sounds like
Uh,
olive, right? OLIV is in Victor, E is in eat. But he is saying A, ow,
Aleph.
E is in
Aleph.
eat, P is in
Peter.
right, and H is in hat, right? Or Haley.
Or
So
Alef, however you want to put it. Aleph. Yeah.
yes, yes. And so tell me what you were saying earlier about the when you went to go say it, and you were like, Alepha.
Oh, Aleph,
Yeah.
Aleph. No, Tessa was playing around with pronunciation. She's like, I don't know, do I say it this? I was like, it's kind of like saying like olive it, olive it, olive it,
Yes, all of it.
olive,
Because it
Aleph.
literally is.
It's Aleph. It is. It's Aleph. It's everything. It's the upper, the lower, the unmanifest, the manifest. And there's no distinction yet. It's before distinction exists. Distinction happens with the second letter, with base. Base is fundamental duality. Base is masculine, feminine, manifest, unmanifest, space, time, essence, appearance, whatever you want. Any fundamental duality is represented by the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Yeah. But before that is undifferentiatedness, undifferentiated, which means you can't say anything about it, because anything you say, if I say it's blue, that excludes red. If I say it's big, that excludes small. You cannot say anything about it. So that's why the sound that the letter Aleph makes is silent. It is not the letter A. It is an absence of a consonant so that a vowel can come through. There's it could be it could be e, it could be u, it could be a, it could be any of these vowel sounds. The Aleph is a placeholder which has no sound. It is a clear window for the vowel sound to come through. Whereas the next letter, like the base, the B, is ba, boo, be, b. It still lets the vowel sounds through, a, u, e, but it has a b in front of it. The Aleph is none of that. It's not articulated. And Tessa and I had talked before. There's so many ideas we could have crammed into this podcast because it's like, what there's just so many fundamental ideas in the Hebrew language. But one of them that we touched on was the distinction in Hebrew between consonants and vowels, because the Hebrew alphabet does not have vowels, because the Hebrew people were a very tight-knit, closed culture that had a continuous, ongoing oral tradition amongst themselves. So if I would say write, let's say, this is how people used to text, English speakers, right? Before we had smartphones, we didn't want to write out the whole word watermelon, so we'd write WTRMLN. And anybody I sent that to, any English speaker, knows that it means watermelon, WTRMLN, and they could say watermelon. If I texted that to a Chinese guy who's just learning English and doesn't know the word watermelon yet, he doesn't know if it's Weedermelon or Woodermaloon or Wadermalon or Wheatir me Leone. He doesn't know anything because the vowels are not would not be written out explicitly. So that's how Hebrew works. It's written out the consonants, and it's the cultural context and just the fact that everybody spoke the language. People speak language before they write it down, right? Even illiterate people speak the language. So this was a closed, tight community where everybody spoke the language. So I didn't have to write out WATERMELO, and I can write WTRMLN, and you know that I mean watermelon. So the vowels in Hebrew are implicit. There were no vowels in Hebrew until, and this becomes deeper, don't worry, it's not just a history lesson. There were no vowels, written vowels in Hebrew until the Jews were more dispersed and they were losing the cohesion that they had when they were all living in the land. And then the elders were worried that like people are not going to remember how to pronounce our holy scripture. So we have to come up with a method of saying, no, this is Baruch instead of Bira'ech, like we have to find a way to transmit the vocalization of these string of consonants. So then they developed a set of symbols, and this is in about, I think this is the 6th century, about the 6th century, 5th, 6th century, in a particular place where it really was codified in the city of Tiberias, which we call Tiberia, which is in the Galilee. How do you say the Galilee? Galilea, the Sea of Galilee. Yeah, the Galil. Yeah,
You're
so
saying it right.
Galilee. I forget what. Okay, so it's a city. So there they codified the vowel sounds. But the reason I'm saying that, and this goes back to the depth of the letter Aleph, is because vowel sounds were more abstract and more implicit and more sort of just existent than consonants. So in Hebrew thinking, the vowels and the consonants represent two different realms or two different layers. The vowels, if you think about ah, e, ooh, ah, they're very fundamental. It's like the outgoing breath. It's like the breath of God. It's just the power behind creation. Every expression of a consonant has to have wind behind it, has to have articulation behind it. So the vowels are just the wind. And wind in Hebrew is the same word as spirit. There are several words for spirit, but one of the words for spirit, ruach, literally means wind, and it means breath. So the letters inhabit a less tangible space. They're less articulated. There's no articulation of form. It's just the outgoing of the breath. So I call this realm aspirational. Aspiration, but spirit coming from the same word, breath. And I say they're aspirative because they exist in the realm of potential, and it's an undifferentiated way. The out breath has yet to manifest a particular thing. Okay, I see we're getting a little bit in the weeds, but The letters then are what I call articulating. So the letters then articulate the spiritual essence that's expressed through the vowels, and they give shape to it. So then it's brown, it's green, it's red, it's ta, ka, bu, ga, la, ba, va, ma, all the sounds you can make with your mouth. And these sounds are made with your mouth. It's a coming into materiality of something which was once immaterial. So anyway, vowels and letters. The vowels are more less manifest, I would say. They're more in the realm of spirit, and the consonants have to do more with the realm of the earth, articulating things in the manifest world. So the Aleph, which is representative of God and is the first letter that we study, it's the fundamental principle, is simply a space without articulation that allows the spirit, that is the vowel sound, to come into the world. It just allows the vowel sound to come into the world. It doesn't put any, doesn't try to control it. Doesn't put any clothing on it. Doesn't direct it in any particular direction. It's a window for the existence of to come into the world.
It just reminds me of grace.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
comfortability of just being. When I meditate with personal training clients, um, I try to create this space and teach them that uh, they have this space, right? They are allowed to be, right? They have a right to be in existence, right? And so through trauma and through, childhood issues or whatever, we tend to get smaller. And so I try to allow them to be in a space that's just for them and remind them that the space that they're being held in right here, right now, is the space that God created for them. And that
Yeah.
it's
And
always held for them unconditionally through love and grace and compassion.
100%. And your use of the phrase being is really pertinent here,
Mm.
because the primary Hebrew name for God, which is encoded in the letter Aleph, which we'll talk about maybe in a little bit, but which Aleph represents, this primary name of God, is made up of the letters that signify being. In Hebrew, there's to be, will be, and was. Haya, hayve, yihye, right? And those three words are made up of three different letters. And these letters, put in a particular order and mashed together, form the four-letter Hebrew name of God, which I don't pronounce, and nobody can really pronounce because we've potentially lost the tradition of how to pronounce it. But in English, it would be equivalent to the letters Y, H, V, and H. And those letters happening all at the same time in one word with the DNA of what each of those letters means, it points to the idea of existence as such, or just being. Past, present, future, all mashed together in one instant. There's no such thing as any of them. There's just fundamental being. And that is the Hebrew idea of God. We have done such a disservice in our culture of misunderstanding the word being. We say, oh, a divine being, a divine being. And we think that means a thing. A divine being means a thing that floats around in heaven. It doesn't mean that. First of all, divine, I would prefer the word infinite. Infinite means a non finite, a non manifest being, an isness. Isness is a much
Oh,
better word. So we could say, instead of an infinite being, which was great language when it was codified, but it's gotten passed down through the mouth of fools. So instead of saying that, we could say an unlimited isness,
mm.
or an unbound isness, or is-ing, an ising.
Yes, I
Right?
so we I think in the beginning, when I met Aaron, the yoga part of it was definitely I a yogi can always recognize another yogi, right?
Eh,
Even if he's a swimmer too, right?
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
so the isness, we say that in
The
yoga,
is.
because when you can get beyond yourself and come into a place that was and is and will always be for you as long as you're physically here, right? And we get so caught up in all of the outsideness of it instead of being internally inside and being inside of this body and being grateful and just being inside of it, right? With gratitude and all the other things. I'm kind of squirreling away.
No, no, it's
So,
there's a line, there's a band that was kind of a hipster band from my youth that, everybody kind of had to listen to be cool. And I love them very dearly. It's a band with a very strange name called Neutral Milk Hotel. They're a very
hmm,
odd band, but he has this line where he's just talking almost dream language, sort of. And then he says, how strange it is to be anything at all.
hmm, I
Isn't that
love that.
beautiful? And
It
it's,
is
you go, oh, my dog and the boss and the traffic and how strange it is to be anything at all.
at all.
Anything. Anything at all.
Anything.
The fact that is, sometimes it's enough. And
It's funny how you become in love or entranced with a two-letter word, be and is, right?
there you
Because,
go.
you know, um, I have a particular friend and she is amazing. And I say to her all the time, you are because you are,
So, yeah.
right? I don't say you is because you is.
yeah, right, right.
You are because you are. Because we
Yeah.
are.
There are
The
moments where
fact that
that
we
is enough.
are,
Yeah.
yes.
When
Amen.
somebody's,
Yes.
goes through a trauma, it's not always the right medicine because you can't access it. But fundamentally, You know, the fact that is enough. And then
Amen.
everything else is just a flavor of is.
Yes, a flavor of ideas. I'm going
Hmm.
to be going back through this episode, taking
And editing
notes.
everything out. It's going to
Not
be a
editing,
montage of
but
nothing
taking
I said.
notes.
You're just going to take every word I said and just make your own sentences. Be like, really, I don't like my parents very much. you know? okay. Okay, you're going to go back through. All right, with minor editing.
My,
Um,
I
yeah, so anyway, Aleph is the is, and the isness, the is that is, the fundamental is, which is, and if the entire universe ceases to exist, it still is because it was the is that allowed for the universe to arise in the first place. So like it's all good. There's an is that's independent of manifestation. And that's the fundamental truth that Judaism tried to bring to the world. That's the sort of quote unquote God, which is a foreign word to Judaism, the quote unquote God of the Jews is fundamentally this magnificent is.
hmm, that's a hell of a quote right there.
yeah, well,
All
put it
right,
on
so
a t-shirt
grace,
and give me 50%.
there you go.
yeah.
Grace and transformation. Can you share a moment when your study of Hebrew offered you a deeper sense
Oh
of
yeah,
grace or a
100%.
profound shift in perspective?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard to talk about profound shifts like, in this format quickly, but like aside from like any particular instance, what I learned was that I was very dedicated to this meditation practice that I basically would call to myself sitting in the light, find the light and stay there. That was my practice. And that was great. And I got so much out of it. But it was sort of like, I thought, that was it, man. But what I started to understand was that I had sort of just discovered the spiritual pool and I had reveled in the fact that there's water and just the feeling of water. And I'd sit in the light and sit in the light and sit in the light and sit in the light. And then it's like, now what do I do? Now I have to go eat breakfast. Okay, I just meditated for 2 hours. And that was like, wow, but like, I don't know how to apply that in the real world. When I started studying Jewish scripture, in the tradition, in the authentic tradition, not in a fake way. There's plenty of ways for that, but in a deep way with sincerity, I recognize that this isn't about figuring out a concept or getting some information. This is a spiritual practice. And the same way that doing yoga uh, sort of illuminates the body by letting the divine light get into the crevices and connecting your deepest will and your divine will to the body so that everything's of one accord. The same way yoga does that, the study of Hebrew scripture does that for the frontal lobe. So all of a sudden I was sitting in spiritual spaces, but having irrational thoughts and profound thoughts and philosophical thoughts and thoughts about the symbolism of these letters. And the letters were teaching me very, very deep things that had consequence in my life. That, oh, now I understand how to navigate that situation because this principle should precede this principle or whatever it would be. I'm talking abstractly, but I discovered that Hebrew study is essentially yoga for the frontal lobe. And it's a process. It's not about getting an understanding of something. It's about doing your push-ups and bringing the light of God into the intellect and the reason, because I had sort of closed that door and thought I was being a good Zen master and saying, oh, thoughts are overrated and Western rationality is a cage and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, well, what the hell do you do at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday? You have to make a decision. It was like, oh, the light's not deciding for me. It's like, well, that's because I haven't drawn it into the mechanism that makes decisions. I haven't allowed the light to come into the human thought process in the human brain. And when I started studying, it was like that light was being pulled into my brain so that my brain was able to be illuminated by and function as a consequence of the unified divine light. Which, why wouldn't I have allowed the unified divine light to express itself as human thought? Why did I insist that it only express itself as intuition or a feeling or just the silence beyond whatever? That's great, but I'm also a human being who loves going to Walmart and seeing what's on sale. You know, I love that. And it gave me my life back.
Being in, and we're not in the same room, but being in conversation with him makes me so happy. Whew.
Well, it's one thing to sit like a stone and think that that's virtue. And it is a path. It is a step on the path of training. It is. You have to find the light and you have to love the light and you have to sit in front of the light and then you have to let the light blossom.
I think blossom is hard.
Hell yeah.
Oh my
You know,
word.
those guys.
Laughter to tears. Okay. Um uh, all right. So for those of us that are new to Hebrew, I the way that I have been learning it is someone that understands the language and has been going through the Bible verse by verse, right? And I
And you
have
don't
had
have to. I'm sorry,
right.
go on.
No, no.
I don't
But
I
for
don't think most people need to go study Hebrew. I don't think they have to. I'm just here
no.
to make the case that it's a legitimate path. And I think it's been cast aside or scorned a little bit. And I just want to restore its crown to it, that it's beautiful and contains God, just like a cup contains wine. It is a vessel. That's all. I don't think anybody needs to go study it, especially if it's not your background, your tradition. A Strong's Concordance is great. If that's all you want to get into for Hebrew, concordance is great, man. That's plenty of Hebrew. But anyway.
Restore its crown. He said restore its crown.
Well, yeah, it's a disparaged, you know.
Oh my
People
word.
just
So
don't
the
know.
question
Yeah.
and what I was saying is that I have come to appreciation in the last couple of years. And, this pastor, he's not even a pastor, he's just a teacher that, studied Hebrew. And then he goes verse by verse and made a podcast about it. And it's just been so overwhelmingly awakening for me because Southern Baptist Pentecostal raised, and uh, a lot of the things that I thought, you know, from my background was taken out of context, right? Which is, you know, it's not just context, but it's perspective, right? Because everybody has their own perspective when they're reading something. And so we could go deep into that, but we're not. So the question for someone who is new to Hebrew, what's a simple yet powerful insight about Aleph that they could carry into their daily life, something that invites more freedom in their mind, body, and or spirit? And I think we've already answered this question, just being and just is, but
Yeah, but there's more. I mean, the specific letter Aleph, I would say, and this is big, and I don't know if we'll be able to get there with the feeling right now, but Aleph teaches you that there's no division between the upper world and the lower world.
mm, how beautiful is that?
Yeah, up, down, that's all. You know, find me a place where God is not, that kind of a thing.
How far is the east from the west?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the idea that you don't have to run away from Earth to chase God, and that you don't have to believe some particular narrative inside your mind and take it to the extreme, and then at the end of that road you'll find God if you really believe and you push. You do have to practice, and you do have to find a way, but like, God is now, God is here, and there's absolutely no other. There is no other. There is not some realm that you're going to get to where all of a sudden there's God. There is going to be a realm where God's more revealed. I mean, I listen to near death experiences all the time, and certainly the light presents itself very purely to people, sort of unclose itself when the world falls away. But God is here and has always been here. And you might be wearing a lot of clothes, but don't go running away from the clothed God thinking you're going to find God because you have a vision of God who's naked. You know, just because God's wearing 1,000 garments, hug him through those garments.
Mm,
Don't say, I don't recognize it. I don't recognize him. Where is he? You know, last time my father shook my hand, you know, I saw his skin and it looked like my skin. And now he's wearing a glove. I don't believe it's my father anymore. You know, the father and the glove are one in this metaphor. It's very hard to parse out. But the same way that the still air and the sound that the still air is making are the same thing. It's just the air contorting itself to make sound waves.
mm-hmm.
God, who is absolute and sincere and silent, is also contorting himself to create this world and present himself to you as himself in different shapes. And there's no separation. And that's one of the essences of Aleph. And I don't feel I got it across very good, but it can be really comforting when I sit here in my chair sometimes and I'm trying to get to God, get to God, get to God. And then you start to back down and go like, oh, am I where God is not? It's
Mm,
insane.
it is very insane. It's,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking about all of the past lives that I've had, stages of trying to get to God. And when I was a kid, I went to a couple of different churches because um, different portions of my family had different beliefs, right? And so I went to all of them. And it was just because I didn't know how to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was trying on all of it, right? And then
Aleph it.
exactly. Amen.
It was
Um
all the path all along.
and then being married and trying to raise children the right way. Southern
I,
Baptist Big Church, you know,
yeah.
um Sunday school, all the things for the kids, all the things for you, and
Mhm.
never feeling like I knew God, right? Learning
Mhm.
scripture. My oldest daughter used to be a part of that group where, you memorize it, like you can open up the Bible and you can point to the scripture and you see how
Wow,
fast it is. Yes.
cool.
Yeah.
There's
It's all
benefit to that.
legalism, right? It's all
Yeah, yeah, but there's
legalism.
there's
It's about
benefit to
us.
having it on tap.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and in the last, I mean, definitely since I became a yoga teacher, but in the last 2 years, you just you get
God
peeled
becomes
back,
real.
right?
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, and you're like, so I read the Bhagavad Gita and God isn't there? Are you
Right.
serious?
Right. That book's insane.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like it's just I was so small, and
Hmm.
that's because I chose to be out of fear and
Hmm.
trying to be something other than Allah.
Yeah. Cultures are really committed to boundaries, and
Yes.
and cultures need boundaries. I mean, humans need skin, but disparaging a different skin, we all know that that's no good. So it's the same way intellectually. There's a system over there that's been self-contained for thousands of years. You think they're not interested in God over there?
Ugh.
Of course. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I went through that after I lived in extremely religious community for more than 10 years. I thought that I wouldn't be affected by the sort of exclusivity and the us and them thinking. It's very, very hard to avoid. And that's not somebody's fault. That's just human nature.
It is.
Yeah, it's something we all have to. People stand on the sidelines and criticize people for getting too involved in their culture and disparaging of other cultures or being afraid to try things outside their culture, getting too religious. It's really easy to disparage from the sidelines, but the people who are in that pot, that boiling pot of trying to commit to a culture and sort of crack the shell of what's really at the heart of a particular tradition and really committing to it, they're really the ones doing the work, parsing out, well, how much do I devote myself to this practice? How much do I allow outside influence to come in? What are my boundaries and what's my practice look like? What's my home look like? And what do I teach my children? And like, this is a real fundamental human struggle and something you got to go through. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
We're doing pretty good as the human race these days, getting better.
I agree.
Yeah.
Um, with everything that you've shared,
So that's introduction to Hebrew part one.
right?
Yeah.
From the power of the breath to the unity of Aleph, represents, what's one final thought or encouragement you'd offer to someone seeking greater freedom in their life today?
Well, something I'm going through because I just devoted myself to sort of a charity project for several months, and that is a path to God and to bringing more light into your life of just pure selflessness. But it dragged on a little bit, and I did sort of lose track of my practice to some extent. And my practice is usually just sitting surrounded by books and closing my eyes until I feel like reading one of them, and just deeply deciding that I want to hang out with God and I want to seek God's counsel, quote unquote. It's hard to talk. It's not like God's a separate being, but seek that divine layer of my soul and seek my own deepest counsel, which is God expressing itself through me. So I had lost track of some of that because I was so dedicated to other people. So my final word to anybody would be just you have to decide that you want to be happy and you have to acknowledge the part of you deep down that realizes that the only true happiness is, you know, peace in your heart and the joy that surpasses, peace that surpasses understanding. And you have to
Yes.
devote yourself to doing that and you have to actually do it. You can't just ask for it. You have to sit down and say, I don't know what I'm going to do for this 20 minutes or this half hour, but like, I just want to think I want to be with God. Like, God, I don't know what to do, but my intention is that I want to strengthen the muscle that is aware of you. Please help
Mm,
me be aware of you. That could be staring at a picture of a saint who you really trust and trying to talk
mm.
to him through his eyes.
Peter.
I've been doing that lately
Yeah.
with I won't get into my particular canon of saints. Or that can be, you know, meditating or studying Zen or laying on the ground and getting the kinks out of your body and thanking God for the blood flowing through your system, you know. But you have
Yes.
to decide that you're going to commit to spiritual practice. You cannot fake it, and you can't just say, please Jesus, please Jesus, please Jesus, you know, in between coffee breaks. You have to just recommit, and it's the greatest joy there is, and that would be my final word. It's these are
There
paths.
is
These are not answers. These are practices.
there is no greater joy.
Yeah, there's only one joy. As the poet Rumi says, everybody knows Rumi these days. One must learn to distinguish between joy and delight of the soul. That's what he
You quoted
says.
Ruby.
Wow, Rumi's the bomb. But I don't remember. I think that's Coleman Barks says joy and delight. He may, you know. But for myself, I say pleasure. You have to distinguish between pleasure and delight of the soul. And it's okay to allow yourself to stumble into pleasure as long as it's part of your process and you realize, well, I'm trying to ride this bike and I still fall down sometimes because I just want some ice cream and to lay in bed and doom scroll on my phone. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. But the next morning, be like, you know, I would really rather be in that space with God tonight. Like, I really want that. And be easy with yourself. And the ice cream might call to you again. You say, yeah, I know this isn't as good as God, but I'm just habituated towards it. But really, I want to be with God. And you keep going, and that's spiritual life. Eventually, it's like a rocket leaving orbit. It's much easier once you escape the gravity of your old bad habits. And that's
Yes.
where happiness is.
Yes.
That
All
is my
right, dear
final
friend.
word. And somehow that has something to do with the letter Aleph. Trust me, I
It
don't
does. It does.
know. All
So,
right.
any books that you recommend?
Uh,
Spiritual, non-spiritual?
Yeah, I can't really talk about it in terms of like Hebrew language. It's too complex to like. There's no like beginner books. You'd have to really go study in the tradition. And that's a whole path. So there's no books that I've seen that like satisfy me with the Hebrew stuff. But spiritual books, otherwise, one of my favorite books is Nisargadatta Maharaj. I am that. I actually had a quote from Nisargadatta Maharaj at the beginning of my Hebrew Bible as an answer to the question, why does the Torah begin with the letter B instead of the letter A? And Nisargadatta is just really great about. I mean, he didn't answer that. You know, I took a quote from him that had nothing to do with it. But Nisargadatta, I am that. How do you spell his first name? Nisar, Nisar, Gadatta, Nisargadatta. Or search for I am that. There's a free PDF online. He was an Indian guru in the 70s. His translator was also an enlightened man named Maurice Friedman, who's extremely interesting and a landsman for me. He was a Polish Jew, which is interesting. So I am that. Then the person who told me about Nisargadatta Maharaj through his writings is David R. Hawkins. I love David Hawkins. Um, if you're not familiar with David Hawkins, he's totally weird, but he's a genius and he's one of the deepest spiritual seekers I've seen and a spiritual finder in his case. He really crossed a threshold into knowledge. He has a book called simply I, the letter I. The subtitle is Reality and Subjectivity, which essentially means that the experience we're having right now is reality, that the subjective experience of being alive is the reality of life itself, whatever. He's sort of academic, but not as academic as I just made him sound. He's a genius. He developed that scale of consciousness that you see in a lot of New Age circles. I love David R. Hawkins. Reality and Subjectivity is his strongest book. There's a book by him called Letting Go, which is much easier to read and much more gentle. If you need a gentle book, Letting Go, The Path of Surrender by David R. Hawkins. I'm going to give you a third one. Uh, I love Zen. I'm very into Zen. There is a translator of Zen named Thomas Cleary. Any of Thomas Cleary's Zen translations are excellent. Yeah, those are my three, I guess, for now. Ask me tomorrow.
Friends, I told him today, an hour ago, about the book recommendations.
Eh.
book recommendations, and he pulled that out of his hat.
Oh, I
So,
like books, man. I got too many books. I got to
yeah.
stop reading books.
No, never. Never, never, never,
Yeah, yeah.
never.
People of the book and all that, you know.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, if you were a superhero, my friend, what would
Superhero,
you
I'd be
be?
Ramana Maharshi. I'd be Ramana Maharshi. I would have peace and stability in my heart, and nothing could ruffle me. And I would just be okay all the time. I would have the superpower being unruffled perpetually and just okay. That would be my superpower.
So tell us who that was for the people that do not know.
Ramana Maharshi, Ramana is his first name. Ramana, if you look that up, you'll probably find him. He was one of the greatest Indian sages of the past, 100 years, probably more than that, in my opinion. And he's the classic man on the mountain who had sort of an awakening experience that left him sort of unable to speak for 2 years when he was, I think, 16 years old. And he ran away from home and fled to this mountain called Arunachala, which he believed was a divine place and a manifestation of the divine itself. And he, after 2 years of not really talking much, he sort of emerged as this presence that people flocked to and became sort of a teacher who basically taught everybody to just seek the I am. I am. They'd say, "Oh, my daughter, and this, and the problems I have." And they'd say, "Who has the problems? Who has? Look at the who. Who is it that has the?" His approach verbally is not always mine. I prefer Nisargadatta Maharaj, who was more verbose and combative and got into the trenches with things. Ramana is very, very, very deep and will give you a couple sentences that you could spend a lifetime on. But Ramana's presence comes through his pictures and his words, and he's his grace has helped a lot of people, and there's a lot of stories about that. And I love Ramana Maharshi, and I would have his superpower of being perpetually at ease and able to love all things, even the cancer that killed him. He wouldn't let them amputate his arm. This was in the 1950s in India, so it was different. And he said his answer about, but you're gonna die, and the cancer in the arm, we gotta cut the arm. He said, it wants to live too. Allow it. So he was a man of total peace and love. So I'm a big hippie. So Ramana Maharshi, that's my superpower. Peace and love.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Or
I
time
love it.
travel and go see, talk to Jesus, see what was going on back there. I'm particularly interested in all that. But yeah.
I I have had someone else say that. Rachel Scott said that. She's a yogi.
To go talk to Jesus.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she did say Jesus, but she just said time travel,
Oh.
and she named all sorts of people.
Well, what
She
the
is
hell
really
happened? Why did they kill him? Like, what was going on, man? What happened? It's so perplexing. What's going on? You know? Just what
hmm
happened? And
hmm
who is he?
hmm
And
Did you
like,
watch The
what?
Burning Bush? I mean,
Yeah,
come
that's cool too.
on.
Yeah,
In the
that's cool.
mountain where Moses is coming down and he's
Well,
been
yeah.
out there for so
I
long
mean,
and he
I
gives
have,
these
yeah.
commandments and then
Well, I don't have any.
Isaiah,
Yeah, yeah.
and then I mean, we can
Well,
just go on and then Goliath and David. I mean, like we could
but it's,
just.
but it's confusing because some of those things are so mythologized by this point. It's like I don't know. Like I know that Moses spent 40 days on a mountain because I mean, Peace Pilgrim in modern times, a woman named Peace Pilgrim fasted for 40 days, with water. She's a perfect like. But it's so like Jesus Christ was like the story of Jesus Christ was like a human being walking around talking to people. Jesus Christ used the bathroom, you know? It's like, what was that about? Like, who is he? Like, what is it to be with him just for an hour and just be like, oh man, I'm really bummed out about something. And like, what is he going to say? How is he going to, and then what the hell's going on with like the priests and the Pharisees and it's like, what's going on? Yeah. And also the evolution of the early church is very interesting, to see
Yeah,
that time period.
and
You know,
food being so much better.
the food, I don't know. I've studied a lot of Mishnah and Gemara and stuff, and there's some nasty food back then, and nasty remedies and cures and stuff too. You know,
Yeah.
weird preserved fermented fish and who knows what's what. Anyway,
Yeah.
stinky things that are. buried in the dirt to preserve them. Anyway, yeah. No, I hear what you're saying though. But yeah, you know, just to really understand, the disciples picking corn on the Sabbath, like what's going on, like what was the feeling about that at the, like what were the Sabbath law, like how calcified was the Sabbath observance at that time, and how much was it still nascent and evolving, and it was a battle between factions, and Jesus was sort of just on one side of it, and like they were calcifying into the other side of it, of like really setting down the law, and he was sort of like, nah, beware the leaven of the Pharisees. I think about that all the time. Anyway, yeah, so peace of heart and time travel. Those are my answers.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. I, I, I think I would have, well, I know that I would have struggled through the crucifixion time, right? Who wouldn't
Oh,
have?
I don't know if I want to be there for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
But I
I'm a
think,
coward.
when he's rapidly, so passionately teaching people, this one particular part, in Matthew, towards the end of Matthew, I think, 27, 28, um, he, he and his 12 have been, walking, 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 and John is still alive. John the Baptist, he's still
Mm.
alive, but they haven't talked to him in like forever. And
Is he in
so there's
jail at that?
yeah, yeah, yeah. He's
Okay,
in prison because of the
right,
wife
right,
uh that wouldn't take her to bed. Anyway,
right.
so they're starving. They've been serving the people, and then they come upon it's either the 3,000 or the 5,000 people to eat, right? And so Jesus is like, we got to feed them, and all the disciples are like, yeah, no, man,
What?
we're
Yeah,
tired. What are you
right.
talking about? And so he's so perplexed because what I assume, like he's probably not perplexed because he's God, but like reading the story and actually teaching this story, I'm like, there's a messenger that comes and that says John the Baptist, they killed him, and then also he's listening to all 12 of these disciples complain about serving people
Bread.
that are hungry, exactly, and then their faith is like, right, and they've
Mm.
seen all the miracles, so that's for me. Now I know. Yeah, I get it. Like, I'm no different. But when you read it, you're like, seriously, you saw all the miracles and you still can't believe you
Well,
didn't see
there's
the miracles?
what one of my favorite Hasidic stories is there's a Hasidic rabbi and somebody comes to him and they go, "How could it be?" I don't know how you say it in English. The incident we call Korach, Korach when
Okay.
Moses is I don't know how it's said in the English Bible, but Korah or Korah, I don't know how it says it. He assembles a bunch of people and goes against Moses. And he says, like,
Okay.
what are you doing here? Like, it's over. Like, it took us out of there. We're in the desert. We're gonna starve. Like, blah blah blah. And this very pious, Hasidic guy asks his rabbi, he goes, "How could it? It doesn't make any sense. You kidding me? Moses with the staff and the miracles and he's like the holiest person. Like, how could it enter anybody's mind? Like, it's insane." And the rabbi says to him, he goes, "Yeah, calm down." He says, "If you're, you come from a certain root, a soul root." And he says, "If you were there, you would have been on Korach's side." He says, "It's very compelling. We don't understand." He said, "We don't know what was going on, but there was
We don't.
you don't know." So,
Yeah. And we'll never
people
know.
love to say, like, how could Peter have looked down after he ran off the boat? It's like, give me a break. Like, you would have ran off the boat. This is real life. You're just going to be like, oh, just run across the water. Like, the faith to even just not have the thought that, like, oh, there's water, I'm going to sink. It's like, that's a level of faith that's so outrageous. And we sit here and go like, oh, Peter looked down and sank in the water. He shouldn't have looked down. He's the only person. He's one out of 12 people in the entire world who were worthy to be born to be disciples of the living Jesus Christ. And he's one out of all those 12 in the history of the universe who jumped off the boat to go to him. And we sit here and cross our legs and be like, oh, I wouldn't have looked down. Like, who knows,
Amen.
It's like become a fairy tale to us. It's like
Yes.
in real life, if
Peter
you remember that it's real, then it's, yeah.
Peter has until I did a study of Paul, Peter was one of my favorite people because
I love Peter. I took
I
the
can
name Peter. My
identify with
second name is
Peter.
Peter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm Aaron Peter. Aaron Peter
Okay.
Fast. Aaron Peter Jefferson Fast. That's my dad's country. But Peter, I love Peter. He's
Yeah,
so
I love Peter.
intense. He's the first of the
Exactly. He's
he's the
very
guy.
intense.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he's the first one though, I'm saying. Like he's Jesus's choice disciple. I mean,
Hmm.
John coined himself the disciple that Jesus loves. But
Right.
Peter was given the keys to the kingdom and he was the first called and
Yes.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I forgot what I was going to say
Oh,
about
so I'm
Peter
so
now.
sorry. I talk a lot.
No, 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 you're good. I completely agree. It wasn't, what was it?
Peter, you love Peter. Before you got to Paul, you were really
Oh,
into Peter.
the, the denial, right? I
Oh,
think that's a
wow.
big one is like, oh, I've never denied Jesus of all the
Right.
things
With
that you've
people
seen.
sitting around
Like,
who are going to
and
kill
you're like,
you.
oh, the Romans coming for you? You're totally
Right.
gonna
I don't
deny.
know him. I don't know. Like, what does Jesus care if I lie a little bit to save my life? What does God care? Like, you'd probably tell me to say, like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah,
Live to worship another day,
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
oh, yeah, no, not me. I
yeah,
would stand up and what? You get crucified upside down? Well, he did that too. It just took him a little longer.
yeah,
Yeah, Peter's so punk rock, man. That's what I think when I was into like punk and stuff. Like Peter, he's like just not allowing himself to be crucified, like upright. He's like, I'm not worthy. It's just so
you
hardcore. He's
can't
so
wash my
intense.
feet. Yes,
Well, yeah. No, but
yeah,
crucify me upside down. I mean, that's insane. You
yes,
know? That's
yes.
like
I often
there's
forget
nothing
about that
cooler
part.
than that.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
no, I
worthy to die
agree.
like my Lord. Like, I
Yeah,
mean,
and yeah,
whoa.
I mean, true. I mean, it's so true. I could totally agree with that because you're like, yeah, no, I'm not worthy. If you're
Uh,
gonna crucify me, you got to do it a different way. You can't do
Yeah,
it the way that
it's
he
nice
did
to
it.
talk
Yeah.
about until they're standing there with nails.
Oh, for sure.
It's
For
like,
sure. And I
oh
was the mom,
yeah.
by the
Uh,
way, I was
uh,
the mom that made my children watch The Passion of Christ
I
many
didn't like that
times.
movie. That I know this is not good to say.
Many times.
Ah, that's terrible. What kind of
Yeah.
mothering? I was kidding.
Yeah.
It's a
I'd be like,
brutal.
you need to sit and watch this.
Yeah, no, it wasn't for me. I expected to get more depth of feeling from it, and it was a little too heavy on the
Graphic.
surface that I didn't get the feeling. I can read the gospel and get a better feeling for the
Yeah.
crucifixion in my own. But I'm sure it
Yeah.
did good in the world in its own way. I'm sure it did a lot of good.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, friend, I
Yeah,
am
ma'am. Thank you.
so grateful. I am
Yeah,
so
that was cool.
grateful.
Thank you. If
Yeah,
anybody else has a
it's
podcast, just call me. This was really fun. Aaron Fast, email me, aaronfast@gmail. She'll tell you. Talk to her. She'll put you to me.
That's
No, this
right.
was really fun. I loved this. This is the first time I've done anything like this. So it was like super, super fun for me. And I really
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I am I'm gonna have to I was thinking while you were talking, I was like, can we just do it with every letter?
Can we what?
Do this with every letter?
Oh, heck yeah. I'll do it.
Why
Yeah.
not? Right?
We didn't do Aleph yet, though. We didn't really do Aleph, but we'll get there.
We'll
It's
get
like,
there.
we got to like one of 8 points about Aleph, but yeah, we'll get
That's
there.
okay.
Anyway, yeah,
Pray
man.
beforehand.
I've thought about that actually. I mean, Aleph's easier than some of the more obscure ones, or letters where the meaning is more obscure. But yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you. Tell your friends and say hi to my mom if you see her.
Well, we're still recording, so
Uh,
okay, friends, thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Aaron, for coming and hanging out with me and being so real and being so vulnerable. Friends, this is a
yeah.
very vulnerable conversation. So enjoy. Yeah, it's really
Thank
good. Thank you,
you.
Aaron.
Thanks.